Hi friends! So I have been working on getting all of the Midnight Lagoon dyed orders done, the special orders that I had this month. I've got a whole table over here full of buckets of yarn that are dyeing, and all the warps are pretty much painted now. But I do have a little bit of leftover dye. So I'm going to take some of my leftover Midnight Lagoon and I'm going to speckle paint some skeins of yarn. I've got some 8/2 cotton, 8/2 Tencel, 5/2 Tencel skeins. They've been soaking in soda ash and they're ready to go. So I'm going to speckle paint them. All right, first up I've got some Ringspun Cotton and it is soaked in soda ash. It's ready to go. I've got the activator on the yarn. I've got my dye set into 3 containers. I get these syringes from the farm supply store. They're for, injecting animals. I just don't buy the needles. I just get the syringes. And I'm just gonna add some color to this yarn and see what happens. So I have 2 types of yarn in my shop. I have Tencel, and then I have this ringspun cotton, which is an unmercerized cotton. The way that it's spun is super soft. It doesn't have the stiffness that a lot of cotton has. It's a lot smoother, but it's unmercerized, so it's really great for towels, but also it's really soft for wearing. It's a great multi-purpose yarn. I still got my zip ties in these to kind of help me keep these in order. I got set here. There's the other one. So I use these reusable zip ties to keep my yarn from going too willy-nilly on me. Although I might take them out here in a minute because they might be getting in the way of my dye. This little paper tray might not have been quite big enough for this much yarn because I'm kind of splattering all over the place, but that's okay. That's why I put drop cloths down. Nothing in this dye studio is precious. That looks like a good amount of purple. Let's add some blue. Sometimes I add enough color to saturate the yarn completely, and sometimes I like leaving those white spots because I think it lets the colors come out a little bit more. And when you wind these into balls, the colors will all kind of blend together, but they still have this really interesting speckle texture. It makes for a really nice textural color when you weave with it. And it's never quite the same twice, which is fun. I personally haven't had a chance to weave with the speckled yarn yet. I had one person show me an example of using some speckled yarn, a couple people now, and it works really well as a warp, as a background color. Because it has a lot of color going on, but it also is a little bit more subdued because it's not striping or spotting, it's kind of blending, but it still has a lot of varied visual texture. How's that look? Oh, this is going to be really pretty speckled yarn. I might end up holding one of these back for myself. I do that every once in a while. I set yarn aside in aspiration of weaving again, and then I never weave. I keep saying I'm going to, but I just haven't gotten quite that far. I have looms waiting for me, projects in my mind. This sort of greeny aqua color's just about my favorite color. This green or a turquoise, I'm a sucker for it. So despite the fact that this is looking really tangly now, I still have these zip ties in here so I can kind of straighten out this yarn. Pick it up, give it a shake. I might move the yarn around in this a little bit so it doesn't resist dye. There we go. Moving that zip tie down just a bit. Do the same with this one. I've got 2 skeins of yarn on each zip tie. That seems to be about the right amount. It doesn't usually resist, but since I'm kind of spraying the dye on or squirting the dye on, it's kind of preventing the spots from getting underneath, so it's good to move them once in a while. I don't think I'm going to add too much more than this though. So I think I'm liking the way this is looking. These syringes might be getting kind of old. They're getting kind of hard to squeeze. That's okay. I think I'm just going to leave it at that. Some white spots in there. I could kind of remove the white spots if I squeezed it a little bit. Actually, you know what I could do is put it inside a Ziploc bag and give it a squeeze. That would help sort of distribute the color just a little bit, just so those white spots aren't so glaringly white. Oh, this might be easier to do without gloves. I'm going to squeeze the air out. Just give it a few squeezes to kind of distribute the color around. It's going to be, especially with this cotton, the dye doesn't the dye doesn't flow out quite as far, but even just a little bit of the tone of color. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I don't know if you can see that at all through that glaring plastic in my studio, but we'll see what that looks like when it washes out. Put one glove back on. Put it in the bag. Touched it barehanded. Oh well. I always get dye on myself. I'm not very careful. There we go. That looks good to me. I think this is going to be really pretty. Now it'll be interesting to see how the look differs between the cotton and the Tencel. So let's paint the Tencel next. All right, next up we've got some 8/2 Tencel. And I might regret this, but I think I'm going to try taking these zip ties out since these are reusable zip ties. There's a little button on it and I can release it. It might turn into a tangly heap, but if I can find the individual skeins, I think I can straighten them out later. Might regret this, we'll see. Just barely fits in that. This is just a paper tray from Target. They make nice little carrying trays for yarn. Again, this has already been soaked in the activator, so when the dye hits the yarn, it'll start to activate, though I am going to let the dye sit on the yarn probably until I come back here tomorrow. Oh, yeah. This isn't much of a, this is a syringe that's not really into dripping. There we go. Let's do a little more. This purple color is actually akin to the eggplant solid shade in my shop, if you recognize this purple at all. It's going to come out a little bit differently because I'm not immersing the dye, or I'm not immersing the yarn in a dye bath. I am putting the dye directly on the yarn, so it might not come out exactly the same as what's in the shop as far as color goes, but it's close. There we go. Let's add some blue. So this gives you an idea of the 3 colors that I use to make my Midnight Lagoon gradient palette, if you were curious at all. It's this kind of deep blue, eggplanty purple, and aqua green. And I use percentage dyeing to create a sort of graduation between the 3 colors. So if you pay attention, one of the skeins is a solid version of the green, one of the skeins is a solid version of the blue, and one of the skeins is a solid color of the purple. And then the skeins in between are graduations between those colors. It looks a lot darker on the Tencel than it does on the cotton, doesn't it? Be interesting to see what it all comes out like when it's washed out. All right, let's add some of this sort of greeny aqua color. There we go. Woo! I missed the yarn completely. I'll just soak it up. This one might end up having a few more white spots in it than the cotton. That's okay. Might try the same thing I did with the cotton, where I give it a squeeze in a Ziploc bag. Woo! Well, a lot went right there. That looks good to me. It's kind of a spot with just purple in it. Oops. Maybe just a touch of blue right there. Oop. A touch of anything with these syringes maybe is not. Maybe I need to think about syringes and other tools for doing this, but it works. Now, here's a question. Now that I've got a mass of yarn, can I untangle it and put it back on those zip ties? Let's find out. Sure enough, here's 1, 2, zip tie back on. Three. They do love to tangle around each other, especially this 8-2 Tencel. It is ornery yarn. There we go. 3 and 4. All right. I will get these put into some Ziploc baggies to set, and I'll get the 3rd set of skeins out. All right, now I've got some 5-2 skeins out, ready to go. Let's get these dyed. And actually, I think it worked out to take these zip ties off, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. That way they don't get in my way. Sometimes the ends of these tend to get tangled up in the yarn while you're moving them around, so you have to be a little bit cautious of them. So if you take them out, it's just a matter of untangling the yarn to put them back on. All right, let's start with purple. Let's fill that up. Wonder these syringes are even going to survive this. All right, here we go. Not a very difficult technique here, just squirting it all over. Trying to go for kind of an even coverage. Okay. Let's move on to blue. Oh, this one's going to be... I wonder if an applicator bottle would be easier than these syringes. They're a little bit hard to squeeze. When I get them initially, they work really well, but then they don't last very long. I think the rubber gets kind of worn out on them. They're not really designed to be used a bunch of times. If you're vaccinating an animal, you use them once and you toss them, so... I like to reuse things as long as I can, but I don't think these syringes are great for reusing. All right, let's add some green. Sometimes I just keep missing the yarn entirely. That's okay, I'm going to sop it up. Real technical stuff happening here. I'm just going to wipe it up like it's a rag. Let's flip this yarn over, make sure the other yarn's getting it too. That looks pretty well covered, I think. Maybe even a little bit more than the other ones. Even just having a different gauge of yarn will change the way that it takes up the dye a little bit. The Tencel tends to spread the dye out a little bit more than the cotton, though, that's for sure. All right, we're going to call that good. Once I untangle my mess here, get them put back on zip ties. I'm going to put this into Ziploc bags like these over here. And then I'm going to let the yarn sit for a while. So to activate the dye on the yarn like this, it takes a while, up to like 24 hours or even longer, depending on the temperature of the room you're in. If I were to go put these in the, like in my hot car, it might only take a few hours to really activate, but I like to set mine overnight at least, just to make sure it all gets activated. And then, because tomorrow is a preschool day, I will be working in the studio. I can rinse them out tomorrow. I'll wash them, I will dry them, and then I will share the results with you as soon as I have them.